In this video, I'm going to react to the US military is everywhere. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. This is the place where I react to music, media, sports, anime, anything related to popular culture. I'll watch it with an open mind and give you my 100% honest reaction to it. And if you could please hit that like button early, I'd really appreciate it. Now, this is genuinely going to be fun for me just because, as you guys know well by now, I've got a keen interest in the US military, considering it's the most well-funded in the world by far. You know, whether it's the technology, the weaponry, the personnel involved, these are all things that are really interesting for me. And this video, I hope, is going to really show me just how widely spread out it is. You know, like, are there bases on every continent? How many bases are there? You know, what kind of hardware exists on these bases? You know, the aircraft carriers, things like that. You know, this video has been requested quite a few times, and judging from, you know, the feedback, it looks like it's really answering those questions well, and I'm sure I'm going to have a fun time with it. So let's go. This is going to be me reacting to the US military is everywhere. Let's do it.
Imagine a world where the most powerful country on Earth in 2021 wasn't the United States, but rather Spain. And instead of setting up military bases just in their own country, they also set up bases all around the world. Lots of those bases are in former colonies, but also there's a bunch in the United States. Just imagine this. You zoom into Fayetteville, North Carolina, and you see a huge military base. But it's not a US military base, it's a Spanish base.
That would be so interesting, wouldn't it? Imagine that.
American soil, with lots of homes for the Spanish soldiers and their families, powerful weapon systems, aircraft, all run by the Spanish military. Go inside of one of these bases and it's all Spanish restaurants. Americans can't come in here unless they work for the Spanish government.
Wow.
And then imagine 100 more of these, all throughout the United States on American soil, and hundreds of more throughout the world.
That'd be crazy.
Or shift the scenario a little bit. What if it was a country that wasn't our ally? A country like China? What if they had military bases, not in the US, but right up close to our border? Powerful weapon systems right off our shores in islands in the Caribbean. If you're an American, you have to imagine what that would feel like.
It would feel horrible. Imagine the constant fear, you know, like just knowing that you're within striking distance of enemy weapons. Paranoia.
If you're not an American, it's likely you already kind of know what this feels like. The United States has an extensive network of military bases outside of our borders. Hundreds of bases. I've been fascinated for a very long time about understanding these US foreign bases abroad, but I've never actually taken the time to accurately map them. So let's do it. Let's map every single US military base around the world. It turns out that's a huge task.
I bet
This is the story of the men of the United States Army who made this project possible, and of man's never-ceasing quest for knowledge.
Let's do it.
This is a full armored division. To give you an idea of size, each of those small dark squares includes more than 1,000 men.
The United States military is bigger than any of us can really fathom. It's so big that even the US military doesn't know how big the US military is. Back in
No way. I mean, surely there has to exist some kind of list which, you know, properly and accurately contains every member of staff, weapon, aircraft, vehicle. Surely that's got to exist, no?
2018, 1,200 independent accountants and analysts came in to try to audit the US Department of Defense. To basically try to get like a paper trail of how big this thing is, how much money it spends, etc. And the Department of Defense didn't pass the audit.
Wow.
Like they literally did not have the documents or the knowledge to really piece together a full scope of what this organization is, how big it is, how much money it spends. So we don't know. Nobody knows how big the Pentagon is in all of its forms. All we do know is that objectively it is one of the, if not the largest and most powerful organization on the planet and in the history of humanity. I mean, if you have a organization that's more powerful than the Department of Defense in the history of humans, like, let me know. I want to know about it. But as far as I can tell, there's nothing bigger and more powerful than the United States military.
I mean, let me think. So if we're including the entire, like the whole of history, and if we're doing it proportionally, what about Genghis Khan's empire, you know, relative to the rest of the world at that time? Surely that has to be close, if not higher, in terms of the amount of people in his horde and the amount of countries he conquered. Good question, though.
In 2021. And much of the US military is not actually in the US, but is actually outside of our borders, all around the world.
This post is somewhere in Germany, overlooking a sector of the Iron Curtain.
One of the first things that Joe Biden and his administration did when they came into power a couple of weeks ago down the road was ask for an assessment of how big is our military presence around the whole world? What is our strategy? And what actually does this presence look like?
The department will conduct a global force posture review of U.S. military footprint, resources, and strategies.
Footprint. I like that. That's like a nice thing. Like, what's our footprint? How big is our footprint around the world? We don't really know. The Pentagon is going to start to try to assess that. So let's help the Pentagon out and try to map every single United States base around the entire world.
This is quite the task. I mean, if 12,000 accountants and analysts couldn't do it and this one guy is able to, what does that say about those accountants?
Let's do it. It wasn't too long ago when I used to think that having military bases in other countries was totally normal. Like, doesn't every country have like military bases in other countries? Yeah. Anyway, this was sort of reinforced for me when I was in college. I did an internship at NATO, with the headquarters of NATO, which was in Brussels. To get this job, I had to get a secret security clearance from the US government in order to enter the military base, which was NATO. This was really cool because there was always like people coming through NATO that I got to meet, like my diplomacy hero, Madeleine Albright, who used to be the Secretary of State, or this guy.
Great honor representing my country abroad for the last 37 years.
Good old Joe. Hey Joe, had no idea you'd be president someday. Anyway, the big benefit of having this secret security clearance is that I could go into any military base anywhere. And so on Saturdays, I would drive an hour from Brussels to a little village in the Belgian countryside where a military base had been sort of plopped down in the middle of the Belgian countryside, in between like stone walls and quaint streets and sheep and farming plots. Yeah, it's a little blurry in this map because it's, you know, a military base and sometimes they blur the satellite imagery. Nothing I can do about it, sorry. And as soon
What is the purpose of military bases? Is it just to have a presence in that country? Like, what do the people who work there do day to day? Like, if any of you who are watching this have work in a base, I mean, obviously I'm sure there's stuff you can't say, but what do you do day to day? I'd love to get some kind of insight.
soon as I entered into the base, went through all the security and I was in the base, I felt like I had left Belgium and was suddenly entering suburban America.
Welcome to the United States.
There was a Taco Bell and movie theaters with American movies and all sorts of shops and like yoga studios and like a grocery store that had all of the products that I was very used to, all at the same prices I could get them in the United States, even though they had been flown across the Atlantic and brought to this place, which is a very expensive thing to do. It was a dream for me as a poor college kid living in Brussels and feeling a little bit homesick, to be honest.
Because Brussels is pretty expensive, you know. To be honest, like, I can imagine a lot of things in that area of Europe being a bit more expensive than they are in the US, particularly food.
honest. I hadn't really figured out culture shock at this point. So yeah, I kind of loved it. And I was, again, sort of like, doesn't everyone have military bases in other countries and they can sort of just go to their military base? And it was just, I was so naive. Alas, I've learned the truth. Luckily, I was able to talk to somebody who literally wrote the book on U.S. military bases abroad.
Most U.S. bases abroad look like not so small U.S. towns.
Over the years, David has been researching and compiling a database of all the U.S. bases around the world. The result is a very detailed audit that hasn't really ever been done to this degree. In fact, a few years ago, the Pentagon's own research arm, the RAND Corp, was doing some research on military bases abroad. And instead of using the Pentagon's list of US military bases abroad, these guys used David's list.
Wow.
Like they used David, he was like, he's a professor, he's like an anthropologist, he's not like a part of DOD. And yet they're like, this list that he made is actually more authoritative than like the Pentagon's own list.
Wow. That's like the ultimate sort of seal of approval, right? When the Pentagon use your information, you're just an ordinary citizen. It's pretty impressive.
And I'm sort of honored, but it's not a good sign if the Pentagon, a Pentagon research arm, is using my list and not the Pentagon's own list.
So I got a hold of David's list and started wrestling with the data and finding a way to display it on a map so that I could get every single base to show somehow. After a few weeks of doing this, I finally have a map. And that map looks like this. Every dot on this map is a US military base or installation of some sort in a different country. Many of these dots are not placed exactly where the base is because many of these bases are clustered in areas, and if I tried to map them all in the exact spot where they really are, they would all just sort of stack on top of each other and you wouldn't really be able to see them. But these dots represent every single base outside of the United States, from huge complexes the size of Rhode Island to small airstrips, little facilities that only house American drones or radar or supplies. This is all of them, and at least all that we know of. And if you look at this map and you see a base that you know of that is not here, or one that is there that doesn't belong there, tell me about it. I want to know, because this is sort of hard information to ascertain.
And there was a key bit of information that you said, that we know of. Because I would imagine there are probably some bases or maybe just military installations where there are personnel that are kept off maps like these, you know, just for the purposes of, you know, just secrecy. So there's probably more. I would bet that there are probably more that aren't on this map.
The Pentagon is not very transparent, and neither are host countries about where certain bases are and why they exist.
Many of the bases around the world are their existence is due to an agreement between the two countries that is often not open to the public, that is secret.
Any errors here are mine and not David's. All in all, the number here is about 750.
Wow.
750 US military bases, big and small, outside of the United States. By outside of the United States, I'm including US territories that are not equal to the United States, like Guam, Puerto Rico, etc. But in reality, we probably don't know the real number because that data just simply is not transparently available to us. There are a couple major clusters here where the most bases exist. One major one is Germany, and the others are Japan and South Korea.
So I imagine Germany and Japan, is that probably a consequence of World War II? Probably?
These are basically holdovers from World War II and the subsequent Korean War, when the US, who won the war, came in and occupied these countries in order to set up a new government, write a new constitution, and to help the post-war transfer to a new government. But what's most interesting to me aren't these clusters that came about because of World War II, but instead the far-flung, sort of unexpected or little-known places that the US military has a little footprint. Like all the dots in Africa, which have popped up in recent years as the US has expanded its presence there. These are usually small installations that hold maybe a few soldiers or mainly private citizens who are government contractors. And they mainly house things like drones or radar or weapon systems. You also have this cluster of dots deep in the Indian Ocean, which is the island of Diego Garcia, which I've talked about at length, about the US military's role in displacing hundreds of local people to set up a base there. Some of these dots are just airstrips, a runway in the middle of nowhere. Wow. And these runways usually belong to the host country, and the US just rents them for a period of time. Like this facility in the middle of the desert in Oman. Places
I wonder, there must be a financial incentive for some of these countries that host the US and allow bases to be built, right? Or maybe protection, maybe the guarantee that if the country is ever attacked, the US would help. There's got to be some kind of incentive for sure, right?
Like this exists to hold supplies in case a war breaks out. So the US maintains these stockpiles of war supplies all around the globe so that they can strike at any point without having to ramp up a war economy at home. It takes away a lot of the friction from going to war.
They've made it easier for the US military to launch offensive wars. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were easier to launch because the US has maintained a huge infrastructure of bases.
Some of these dots don't represent a place where US soldiers are actually stationed, but instead it represents where money from the Pentagon has gone to influence or build up infrastructure. For example, in Iceland, the US is spending a lot of money, tens of millions of dollars, to upgrade this airport, the airport that we all go through when we're going to Iceland, but doing it for military purposes so that the US can use it, can land there if needed. So next time you land in Iceland on your way to the Blue Lagoon, just know that you're passing by one of these little dots. Over here in the Azores, these islands that are owned by Portugal, nearly 2,000 kilometers away from any landmass, there is a group of US military installations mainly used for refueling and weapon storage. Wow. Head up here to Greenland and you'll see a little base way up high, the most northern base in the world where 140 Americans live. Wow. Kind of looks interesting. I'd love to go there someday. Way out here in the Pacific, you've got
life in that base must be pretty isolated, right? I wonder how often they get to fly home, fly to America. Because, these guys are in the middle of nowhere. The conditions must be quite harsh. Yeah. I hope they get some kind of hazard pay, some extra bit of money.
Loads of remote military bases owned by the United States. They're mainly small airstrips, like this base on the southern tip of this huge atoll of the Marshall Islands.
Wow.
All right, listen, I'm not going to explain every single base. There are 750, maybe 800. There's a bunch of bases. I just wanted to give you a flavor of what some of these look like. They're diverse. They're all over the place. And they're fascinating to me. I have been compiling accounts of people who live next to US military bases. I have over 100 accounts from people that, from my call out on Instagram, I want more. I want to make an entire video about life next to a base.
Now, that would be fun.
And that is why I'm calling upon all of you. I'm going to put a link in my description to a survey. It's like a form of what it's like to live next to a US military base. I have it right here. And I'm going to be checking it. You can fill out this form.
Yeah, that would be great to see. It's kind of linked to the question that I asked, what's it like living on one? It must be, because even though you have all of the, American food places, grocery stores and stuff like that, it's still not really America, is it? So there's got to be some kind of you've almost got the culture of America and the culture of the actual country where the base is based, merging a little bit. Quite interesting.
Then I will get your response. You can fill out this form, and then I will get your response, and I will read through your response, and I will use that to construct an understanding of what life is like next to a US military base. I talked to David a bunch about this too. He's done a bunch of research, done a bunch of interviews, and I want to keep talking about this. So if you don't live next to a military base, I want to hear from you. Like,
very interesting indeed. As suspected, you know, the US military truly is everywhere. I mean, the spread of it is wide and vast. Its influence is powerful. And, you know, you know, to ask again, I wonder what life is like on these bases. You know, what do people do there? You know, do they have autonomy over their day? Like, can they pick when they would wake up and go to bed like a normal person would? Or are they literally on the clock 24/7? Really, really fascinating. I'd really love to, you know, get some comments from people who live on these bases. Great video, really, really enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, and keep throwing the recommendations my way. I know I say it all the time, but they genuinely help me out, because if I know you enjoyed watching something, I'll definitely enjoy reacting to it. So like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, keep throwing the recommendations, and I'll catch you in the next one.